Peace, my people. Welcome to I Must Be BUGN, where we have honest, relatable conversations packed with powerful insights that spark curiosity and help melanated, gifted, and neurodivergent folks feel seen, safe, and celebrated. Here, labels don't have to feel like pathology, and complexity feels comfortable. Welcome to the latest recap episode of I Must Be BUGN. This is your host, Sheldon Gay. Today, we'll be recapping my episode with Dr. Bowen Marshall. But before we get into that, let's do what we always do, which is providing a visual description for those it is helpful for. So once again, my name is Sheldon Gay. I use pronouns he and him. Today, I have on my black over-ear headphones. I am a black man with light brown skin in my 40s with curly black hair. It's faded on the side and the back. I have a mustache, a goatee. Today I'm wearing my black hoodie of my design, which says Decolonize Your Mind. Behind me are a series of bookshelves with some of my favorite items and books, including a pillow of my design, which says Labels Don't Have to Feel Like Pathology. Please do go check out both of those things on my website in the shop section. And so with that, look, this was a really good episode with Dr. Bowen. This is a topic that I've been wanting to dig into for a while, for a long time. And to some extent, if you've been listening, I've kind of dabbled a little bit into this myself, but I wanted to speak with someone who is an expert in the field, who has, done research, right, in the field to kind of expand and go a little bit deeper. And that's exactly what we did. I really, really appreciate Dr. Bowen's work. He just, on multiple levels, right, brings to the space, the melanated and marginalized experience, and as it relates to relationships. So if you haven't checked out the episode and you're curious about, again, how neurodivergent relationships kind of play out and some of the challenges and also some of the beauty that can come out of it, definitely go back and listen to it. It's again one of my favorites. But what I want to make sure that I do is share a couple of key takeaways for you to chew on before you go out and hit them streets. And so the first thing that I would say was a takeaway from this episode with Dr. Bowen was that the data shows some really interesting things about autism and ADHD presenting later in life, right? And why it's important to have early diagnosis. In fact, what he talked about were some of these more recent studies that are starting to show that there are actually like biological, like genetic reasons why some people who, present more apparently later in life, right? And so, there's also some research that he shared, right, that talked about the fact that there may be like 4, he said, like phenotypes of autism, and with one of those being the larger one, I believe is what he said, being the one that presents more apparently again later in life, and when they were younger, kind of their development was kind of on par with their peers. A lot of folks start to look for autism diagnoses when children are small and they are quote unquote not hitting their development milestones. And so that's where people start to look for diagnoses. And this research that he was bringing up was showing that maybe there are autistic people for whom, and a good portion of them, for whom that's not true. And if that's the case, then that means that there are a lot of people who will be missed. And so again, with this podcast being one focused primarily on people who are undiagnosed and unidentified, that's potentially a large portion of the people who I want to be in this space and being able to speak to that, right? So, this research is really interesting. Go check it out. It's, like I said, super, super, super interesting. I think, again, this implications for looking earlier, but also looking earlier for things that aren't necessarily developmental milestones, right? Maybe there are those sensory things. Maybe there are other things that can kind of play out. But I mean, even he talks about later in life, some people hitting menopause and the estrogen being kind of a um, a revving engine for one's being diagnosed. Um, there's so much data in there, right? And again, the last thing that I'll say on that is that one of the things he talks about as well is this prevalence of people who have autism, also having ADHD, and you know this AuDHD, what people call AuDHD, which is not a formal diagnosis, but or formal medical term. It is something that speaks to, again, the shared experience. And I would say for me, as a gifted person who navigates lots of different spaces, but particularly a lot of people that I end up connecting with end up being, autistic, an ADHD or an AuDHD. I have this sinking feeling, not sinking feeling, but I have this feeling that we will determine that, if nothing else, giftedness, ADHD, and autism are like a part of this superstructure of neurotypes. And I don't have the research, but maybe someone will pay me to do that research in the future. But yeah, go back and, like I said, listen to this stuff that he's talking about is kind of like the foundation of a lot of the rest of the conversation. And a core part of this was then talking about how neurodivergent experiences, especially for those who are undiagnosed or unidentified, can create undue tension, right? And so, for example, as it relates to autism, one is likely to constantly be dealing with overstimulation. And so if you have a partner who is consistently coming back home and doesn't even know they need time to decompress, right, to kind of regulate their bodies after being in an overstimulated situation, if they're not afforded that time because, maybe their partner actually is like really excited to see them, or because, just life, right? You're a parent, you come back, whatever, the kid's been going crazy in the house, or, you need to take them to soccer practice or whatever it is. If they're not readily afforded that space, their short or tense response, or kind of their coldness, may be seen as a reaction that reflects how they feel about the relationship, right? It may be a reflection in that partner's mind, right, who's on the other side, that it's just their personality. And, open up other narratives. One of the things, again, we talk about during the episode is things like rejection sensitivity dysphoria, right? And so, again, if you have someone who, many people with ADHD have rejection sensitivity dysphoria. If you have an autistic partner and an ADHD partner, which is pretty common, if you have these two folks kind of coming together, and on one side, someone is coming from overstimulation and the other in particular is seeking stimulation, right? And so again, they're the person, when you get home, they're like trying to engage and get that dopamine hit from the person that they love. But at the same time, the ADHD person is someone who has this RSD that then tells them when someone, pulls away, or someone kind of draws that line, that it means all these negative things, and it's a reflection upon them, and something must be wrong, and right, they start catastrophizing and all different kinds of things. These are dynamics that, when you all are not aware of your own self and owning your own piece, to then be able to communicate it within a relationship, you can see how easily this can kind of derail, and how this can be difficult to kind of name when those diagnoses aren't present and kind of on the table. Because yeah, it can seem like every time, Bill comes home, or Jane comes home, or, Kwame or whoever, right, comes home, they are in a bad mood. And it's easy to see, again, I'm sure many of us have been in relationships where the question never arises of, well, is it a bad mood? And even if it is a bad mood, like, what is that bad mood really saying? As opposed to letting that narrator, right, kind of play in our minds. And this, again, is the power of the work. Because when you can sit there and say, I need to give Sheldon whatever 15 minutes to decompress, to just regulate his body. How can I help Sheldon regulate when he gets home, as opposed to how can I immediately kind of jump on Sheldon and want all the hugs and kisses and the tell me about your day kind of stuff, right? If I give him that 15, 30 minutes, whatever it is, how much more can he then be present for me and for the kind of experience that I'm looking for? And is 15 to 30 minutes of waiting, is that worth the rest of the day, the rest of the night being so much better, the rest of our relationship being so much better? And this is, again, the power of what Dr. Bowen is doing. This is his work, right? And he also spoke about in the episode, right, this challenge of not just combining neurotypes, but also this assumption that other people's minds are working the same way that ours are. And so, again, the more that we are undiagnosed and unidentified and just simply not fully aware of ourselves, the more that it's hard to see, right, to have that mirror up that shows, oh, wait, like, this is how I work. This is not how the world works, but this is how I work. And if this is how I work, then this is how, I can kind of reflect upon what's my role in whatever is playing out in this scenario that's causing tension or confusion or whatever, right? And sometimes it's hard to get there because there's this fear that if our mind is working differently, that it must mean that we're broken, right? If everybody else is like having a different experience and I'm the quote unquote one, then I must be broken. And for those, again, if you listen to this, you must know, right, that I must be bugging is about pushing back against that narrative, right? Yes, it is. It's me talking about this experience of like, you all don't see this, I must be the one that's bugging. But then there's also this affirmation, this claiming of the fact that, no, this is who I am, right? I own this. It doesn't mean I'm broken. It doesn't mean I'm deficient. It doesn't mean anything like that. It means I'm different. It means that I'm seeing the world differently. And because I can honor and recognize my uniqueness, that I'm not afraid of exploring what it means to have a mind that's working differently. And, again, this is a non-trivial thing, right? But it is something that is important for our growth. Again, in this episode, we spent a lot of time digging into the many different implications of what lack of awareness could bring, and even for him in his own personal journey. So, like I said, go back, listen to what he's sharing, and then the last thing that I would talk about is the fact that neurodivergence, yes, is a human experience, but in a society set up for normalization, it is also a marginalized one. And so, we talked about this line that many of us have heard, right? That everyone's a little autistic, right? It's like, no, not everyone's a little autistic, or insert whatever neurotype, right? Not everyone's a little dyslexic or dysgraphic or not every whatever, right? Like you get it. There are human experiences that everyone has, but there are some of those experiences where the dial is kind of tuned a little bit differently, right? And so if you don't personally know what it's like to listen to the world on like concert speaker, thumping in your ear level, or maybe kind of in reverse where it feels like you've got several kind of mediocre earplugs kind of stuffed into your ears where it's hard to hear, and hard to understand what's coming through. Many of us have auditory processing challenges. And so if you don't know what that feels like to have that constantly be a thing, not like, oh, I mishear things sometimes, but to consistently have that at a high level, then no, you don't, not everyone is a little anything, right? Because it matters how that is said. One of the things, and this is what he talks about, right? And he mentions furthermore, right, that there are some people who are saying this from a perspective of, again, this lack of awareness about themselves. They're like, oh, well, I do that. And, I know what that's like, but I'm quote unquote normal. That's the like the implication in their mind. And so, you know, um, one of the things before I go there, I just wanted to mention too, is like, I've talked about this in a few of my speeches or whatever, my presentations, is that um, every one of us knows what it's like to want a warm hug and to receive a warm hug. But I think we all could also imagine what it would be like to consistently feel like you're in a giant group hug everywhere you go. That would just be too much. Like, okay, group hug, a few seconds, fine. Group hug all day as I go to the bathroom, to the mall, to the kitchen, right? Too much. And so that's what it can be like, particularly again for those of us who have um, significantly more synapses and other things going on that are pulling in this data from the world. Separate conversation, but you know um, very relevant to again what this episode was talking about. And so another thing to kind of round it out is, as we were talking about in the episode, this thing about marginalized identities and how this can be a little bit different. It can be hard to even recognize in ourselves our neurodivergence, because how often it is represented is something like a Sheldon Cooper, right? And it's like, well, I don't act like that, I don't talk like that, I don't dress like that. So I don't see myself in that. I can't have a mind that works differently. I work like everyone else, right? Another reason, for particularly again for those who come from melanated and marginalized communities, it can be difficult is because it can feel like accepting more burdens that frankly like white people and others will simply dismiss or minimize. And who wants to do that? Who wants to accept that as their reality? Right? And so these are the things that many of us are working through, I'm sorry. And it reminds me, actually, as I was preparing to do this episode, I was listening to Fear by Kendrick Lamar, and it got me to thinking, because in the song, if you know, and if you don't, like, I'll put it in the show notes, you can listen to it. But it's like he's talking about, these things that bring up fear in us, right? And particularly from a parent's perspective of like how to discipline and keep a child in check. But also kind of the love that's behind it, right? This idea that I'm putting this fear in you to protect you, right? What it also made me think about was a clip that I had seen not too long before that, earlier today, which somebody said was from Atlanta, the show. It's hard to watch. I don't know if I'll put it into the show notes. You may have to look it up yourself. But it involves this little boy who is being forced to like dance in this like school hall or whatever. It's like in the hallway, and his mom's like yelling at him, or like not yelling, but like berating him and kind of like admonishing him and telling him like, yo, like they think you in here acting like you're the R word, right? And that he's basically admonishing him for his neurodivergence. And she's like forcing him to perform, forcing him to do all these different things to, because he's like, apparently he was quote unquote acting up in school. And so you see her doing this, you see a man who I assume is his father or some, father figure there. But then as she's saying this, she then goes, do you know what these white people will do to you? They will kill you. And this is what brings the entire thing home, or at least to a different level. And this is why I may bother to share it, because this is the key point, right? It's like, as we've talked about in previous episodes, that's where a lot of this energy is coming from. It's this fear that, again, an already marginalized population, and a population that has seen how it literally can be life or death, showing up differently that we have these people who care about us, who are trying to protect us, but haven't learned a way to do that in a compassionate way, in a way that just still honors who we are without tearing us down and putting fear, like not using fear, but using love to lead us through. Because it is true, right? That, again, in some spaces, you got to kind of know your surroundings, right? Like, as I've said before, like, know when to wear your hoodie, right? And that, again, on multiple levels works. But again, what we talk about a little bit about in the episode is, again, he as a queer, non-binary person trying to navigate his self-discovery and like how he shows up, and as a half Asian man, people questioning his, not even really questioning his ethnicity, but like assuming his ethnicity and then making certain, decisions and assumptions and ways of treating him based upon that, right? And so, like he said, he's like, I knew that they weren't seeing me as a person. I was just being treated as a script. And so, again, realizing how important this work is, and how important it is for folks like us to be doing this work, because we know what that's like. I know what it's like to walk into a room I remember, this is brought to mind, like, as a young black man, I was at a train station going to a NSBE conference. Shout out to the National Society of Black Engineers. And me and a friend of mine who was also in the organization, we were in our suits, we were going to a conference, and this woman walks by and assumed that we were wearing these suits because I think it was like either she thought we were going to church or we were doing something else, or we were trying to like sell something, right? It certainly wasn't anything related to academics or professional development or anything. It just wasn't even on the radar, right? And so that's just a simple example, right? But I know what it's like to walk into rooms and always kind of have to work through those things. And so when you're carrying that with your neurodivergence, it's a whole other ball of wax. And so, having said that, again, please go listen to this episode. I think it's super, super critical. I have said it before that if and when I do my PhD, it will be focused on improving relationships, and learning about how melanated and marginalized people are learning about themselves and navigating love and connection, from a neurodivergent perspective. And that to me is just so important. Like, we can change the way in which we love each other, and through loving ourselves. That to me is where transformation happens. And so Dr. Bowen is doing that work. He shares and has a conversation with me about it. Go check out the episode if you haven't. Yeah. And so, look, if you are looking for help understanding yourself so that you can improve your relationships, go ahead and visit my website, sheldongayisbugn.com. It's in the show notes. Schedule a call with me and we can talk about putting together a plan about, again, how we can do just that. And so thank you again for joining me for this recap episode. And remember these 3 things. 1, take time today to help a child feel seen. Make sure that you start with your own inner child. 2, don't be clever, be wise. Change yourself and you will truly change the world. And lastly, as always, labels don't have to feel like pathology. All right. Thank you so much for joining me. Go check out that episode and see you on the next one. Peace. Thank you for joining me on another episode of I Must Be BUGN. I hope you felt seen, safe, and celebrated by what you heard today. Don't forget to visit my website, sheldongayisbugn.com, where you can catch all of my episodes, book me to speak, and check out my merch. Don't hesitate to hit me up on socials either. I'm eager to hear your thoughts, your experiences, and your stories. Remember, this podcast is all about sharing humanized narratives about who we are and how we contribute to the beautiful and necessary diversity of humanity. This is our place to unmask and just be. And if you've enjoyed today's episode, please share it with a friend, leave a review, and subscribe. It helps our people find community. So until next time, stay up and enjoy who you were meant to be. Ashe.